Good day from ebusradio.com, the place to go if you want to know about the world of business and the business of the world. You can follow us on our live site where we have a daily selection of podcast article uploads as well as music you can listen to on the live stream. Today with me I have Brendon Ambrose. He is the general manager for the data privacy section of ATVANCE INTELLECT. Good day, how are you?
Good, and yourself?
It's great to chat, great to have you with us. So for those listeners that haven't heard our previous ATVANCE INTELLECT podcasts, go and listen to them. They were all done about 2 to 3 months ago. If you're listening this month of August and September of 2020, we're chatting to a different section of ATVANCE INTELLECT today, and that's the data privacy section, which obviously I said earlier, Brendon heads. So as a quick general, give us a quick recap for those that haven't heard about ATVANCE INTELLECT, as well as you yourself, your business history, and the section of the company that you run.
So with ATVANCE INTELLECT, what we do, right, is we have three primary divisions, and that's being the latest one, which is mine, which is data privacy, data security or cybersecurity, and data analytics. And you can hear we're obviously a data-intensive business, right? So data privacy, which is we'll get into a lot more detail of shortly, but essentially we provide privacy advisory services to businesses around the privacy legislation that's effective in your jurisdiction. The cybersecurity division, they operationalize to some extent the privacy advice we give, but they also go far beyond that in terms of the actual information security frameworks and implementations and structures within your organization. Analytics, one day when I can succinctly put into words what they do, I think I will understand exactly how they work. But there are those really smart dudes who understand data and understand how to get the most value you can out of that data. So they can put it in a framework and in a structure that you can actually obtain real value from something you probably already have. And it's I always joke with data scientists because I feel like they're the actuaries of the technology world, where we all just kind of let them do what they do, and no one ever really asks them fully what they do because it's just far too complex. But yeah, so all in all, what we are is we're a data company that allows you to use your data most effectively, protect it, and fits it into a legal framework.
So that brings us over onto your side, data privacy. What exactly does it entail?
So data privacy is a fairly new area of law, right? It's something that's only been around for, I suppose, about 10 years in reality. I mean, it's been developing for a little bit longer, but 10 years ago is when it's really started to gain a bit of traction around the world. In South Africa and in the EU, we have something called principles-based legislation, which is essentially what it sounds like, right? So it's legislation based off a set of principles. I mean, I don't think anyone's too keen to hear those principles now, but what it results is, it's something that I find interesting because it's my passion. But if it's not, if data privacy is not your passion, but it is something, but it is your responsibility or is your problem, then it's probably not the most interesting thing. But I find it super cool. So this principle-based legislation creates a sort of more or less uniform type of legislation across most of Africa and Europe. Now, obviously, there's nuances for each country, and each country has their own way of drafting and their own requirements. But at the end of the day, there's a fairly uniform set of criteria that all countries employ. And the reason being, right, is that the primary piece of data legislation is the GDPR, and that's the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union. And that's really the sort of the most broadly applied piece of legislation, and it's the one that people know the best of in terms of, we need to be GDPR compliant, and how do we do that, right? You have the Americas, which have, it's not really principle-based legislation. They treat data protection and data privacy as more of a consumer protection provision. So it's how in South Africa we would deal with it under the Consumer Protection Act. That's how they would deal with data privacy. And philosophically, it's a bit different in how you'd employ it in an organization, and it's a different way to think of data. Personally, I've always preferred the treating data protection or data privacy as a human right, as we do in South Africa and most of Europe. As I believe it is a human right. I mean, in terms of our constitution in South Africa, it's at Section 14. It includes privacy as a fundamental human right, and I think that's the right way to go. But that could also be my training and bias over my career, right? So probably an American lawyer will say absolutely not. But in essence, what we do in advanced privacy is we take this complex area and growing area of data privacy law, and we operationalize it for your business. Now, the truth is a lot of law firms can do the framework and can provide legal advice, but they don't have the added benefit of having an analytics and cyber division where I understand mostly what they do and can bring them in to actually take the advice and the frameworks that we give in terms of data privacy law and implement it within a customer's business. Now, the goal of that really is to work the data privacy division out of the job within the client. And it's a weird thing to say, but in truth, that's it, right? Where we can automate and where we can put together a suite of services for clients that they're not reliant on lawyers and consultants, that's what we try and do at the end of the day, where clients can always phone us and they can always ask us for legal opinions and they can always ask us for our views on certain pieces of legislation. But at the end of the day, we try and put in place systems and processes within the client that they're self-sufficient and that they don't have to end up spending more money on lawyers, which I found are quite expensive, and consultants, which may or may not fully understand the area in which they're operating. With all due respect, it's just a fairly new area of law. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing here at Advanced Intellect in privacy division.
With the privacy division, one thing I find interesting, and just to relate it back to business in general, is the fact that because you're almost like a hybrid between two different organizations. You have the legal side, and then you obviously have the data side, which is where the rest of Advanced Intellect comes in. But you operate that space in between the two different industries, essentially. And it's those type of divisions of companies that I always find the most interesting to speak about.
Most companies of any scale have an IT department or even an information security department, a legal department, or a risk department, right? We can speak the language of all those departments, and that's really our goal, right? It's not to break down silos within organizations. We're not strategy consultants. We don't come in and try and tell people how to run their business. We just know how to speak to each person in the business that has to do their job, and we make it easier for them to do their jobs within their organization. So it's not so much creating niche departments of a person that can speak to both worlds of data protection in the cyberspace and data privacy in the legal space, but rather we offer services to both departments so that the departments can speak to each other within an organization. I can tell you from personal experience what I dealt with previously in previous companies where I worked was where I was the DPO, the data protection officer. I often had to deal with the cybersecurity guys and the information security guys, and we properly did not speak the same language, and it resulted in quite a lot of inefficiencies in projects that needed to be implemented and things that needed to go through. And it was until I learned quite a lot about the data security industry that's when things started to take off, and that's when things started to really scale at any space. Once I could speak their language. And to an extent, I mean, the data security guys, they speak more legalese than people give them credit for. They really do understand the frameworks and the legislation in which they operate. But they also are very quick to tell you that they're not lawyers and that that their views on things is technical, which is entirely fair. I mean, you can't ask me to make calls on what the data security guys do because they truly understand them. So the goal which we're trying to achieve is this dual service model to some extent of data security, which is the information security side of things, the real hardcore nuts and bolts technical side of your systems, and then the legal frameworks, the compliance frameworks, assessing the compliance universe, and creating something that's pragmatic and that can be implemented within a business to, again, work ourselves out so that clients remain self-sufficient. Because unfortunately now everyone's an expert in this area because it's currently in vogue. And I'm glad it's in vogue because it's an area I'm very passionate about and have a bit of experience in. And it's being taken very seriously, which is always very cool when you're involved in something and you're passionate about it, that the world starts taking it as seriously as you want them to, right? And that's what's happened now in South Africa, where we've had privacy legislation recently implemented where we have a year runway to comply. a lot of other African countries have done the exact same thing during the course of 2019 and 2020. Europe's obviously fairly down the line and fairly mature. I mean, I use mature in inverted commas there because it's a fairly new market, but fairly mature in the data privacy and data protection markets. So I think we play in a very interesting space. And for me, from a legal and compliance point of view, it's something where your knowledge and your career and your passion for something can grow with the industry itself. And I find that really, really awesome in respect of, I came from an intellectual property world, which is where I started my legal practice. And it's a phenomenally cool area of law. And I mean, then that's when I started getting involved in technology law and data privacy. But it's a fairly developed area of law. I mean, there are proper treaties in place between nations. There are groups of countries which stick together, like the Benelux, in order to streamline their intellectual property processes. There are ways in which you can register trademarks throughout multiple countries, which is the Madrid Protocol. There's things in place already that allow the efficient management of your IP as a global organization, but there isn't that yet for privacy, and that's coming for privacy. All of the frameworks and the treaties and the cross-jurisdictional applicability is all coming, and that's, I find, really exciting. It creates a problem. Not a problem, let's put it a challenge, right, to comply properly and to know where your boundaries are, which is why I often say people trained in risk management are often the best place to handle DPO and privacy work, because often it's not so much a legal call as it is a risk call. But that stuff's coming for data privacy, and I think that's seriously, seriously exciting from an industry point of view.
Just to jump in there for 1 second, when I
realized I went on a bit of a rant.
No, that's fine. Rants are great. We like rants. When I was having my chat with, I believe it was Sean, I actually brought up the topic of how do you comply with different laws when you are, for instance, an international corporation. It was a really fascinating talk that we had back then. So, it's interesting that you bring it up again, because it's so relevant, especially for any company in South Africa that's looking to not operate only in South Africa, whether it's an African setting or a European setting or even somewhere else. I think that before people get scared about that they should realize that the broad goal of all of these different laws across all of these different countries and territories, and including across national jurisdictions, it's all going to be aimed at the same thing in regards to ensuring people's protection and their ownership of their data and things like that. There is a common thread throughout all these laws. So whilst it might be slightly differently applied from country to country, you're still going to essentially get the protection that you want.
Absolutely. Look, nothing upsets me more than fear-mongering in respect of compliance and in respect of legal services and legal compliance. It really does annoy me, because in truth, nothing in this area is insurmountable. Nothing is so vastly complex that it's impossible to implement in your business. It's all manageable. And if you manage it properly and if you manage your business correctly, it's not a hugely difficult thing to roll out across a large organization or a small organization. It's something which, if you know what you're doing and you've got a considered approach, can be done fairly simply and in a robust manner. And I think we're at a stage now where we were with anti-money laundering legislation a few years ago. When it came into place, it was this, oh my word, how are we ever going to comply? What are we going to do? This is so deeply complex. You're going to have to do all these checks, and how are we going to build this into our business process? And people did. I mean, at the end of the day, companies that needed to comply with that anti-money laundering legislation complied. And it's a similar cycle I see is happening with privacy. It's complex now. And I mean, the truth is there's not much case law around around the interpretation of privacy legislation. So its implementation is slightly more complex than your ordinary type of compliance. But it's not something that, if you take a proper look at your business and how you're operating and how you use data, it's not something that is overly difficult to implement. And again, that's why I go back to sort of the value add that I want to give to clients, is that I want to try and make it that they can stand on their own 2 feet, and that people can get an understanding of the principles of data privacy, and with that principle and understanding those principles, implemented in their own business and manage things in their own business. So, while there's nuance to different legislation around the world, back to the point of what I mentioned earlier, principles-based legislation. If you adhere to those principles and then you align those principles to each jurisdiction you have, you will broadly have a not decent, because there's still quite a lot of intricacies that you have to ensure, like reporting requirements on data breaches and stuff like that. But you'll have the framework which is fairly okay for an organization, and from there it becomes an entirely manageable process to roll it out throughout your organization, and then it becomes process management, and then there's a lot of really cool stuff out there that can automate certain processes which can be implemented in a business, and you don't need to rely on sort of key man risk if you have a legal or compliance officer who understands the stuff and they lead. But there's a lot of stuff which you can use in a smart manner to make this a less onerous process in your business, and actually use it as a bit of a value add. I say that fairly honestly, where data privacy is one of the few areas of compliance which can be used as a marketing tool of sorts. You know, if clients see that you're respecting their data, using it properly,
you're taking it seriously, yeah.
Exactly. Taking this very seriously, it's indirectly saying to your clients, we respect you, therefore we respect your data, therefore we're going to take care of it.
Well, I mean, everyone has their horror story. I mean, I don't know, especially in the South African context, I guess, where some form of their identification has been snapped away from them and used illegally for whatever. My partner himself has had to deal with Telkom for over 3.5 years because someone went and registered a bunch of cell phones using illegally acquired details. And, you know, if you can take that worry, or you can't even, let's rephrase that, you can't take the worry away. There's always a risk with these type of things, but you can mitigate it so much. And more than that, there's a process that they know that you can follow that will sort it all out.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing to get across. And it does, you're right, it completely gives companies a competitive advantage. And I think people are so scared with the data boogeyman, so to speak, that they fail to see that with all these new challenges that have come about in the last 10 to 15 years, there's so much opportunity. They just need to embrace it. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation? Maybe an idea of what we're going to be chatting about in our next few recordings?
I think in our next few recordings, we'll just break down sort of what those principles are, which I alluded to earlier. I think it's, you know, even if you're a data privacy nerd, or this is something which you're having a challenge with in your organization, it's quite nice to have, you know, the sort of 8 or 9 privacy principles broken down and have a quick discussion around that. And I think that's pretty key for a discussion around data privacy, especially in the African and European sense.
I look forward to them, Brendon. Just lastly, some contact details for you guys at Advance Intellect.
100%. So my email address is Brendon at advance, ATVANCE.tech. Or you can just find me on LinkedIn at Brendon Ambrose, which is BRENDON. That's probably the easiest.
Brendon, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to our next few conversations.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.